It was a quiet afternoon in the heart of Los Angeles, the kind of day where the world felt like it was moving in slow motion. The streets were calm, with a few cars humming by and the occasional pedestrian strolling along the sidewalk. A gentle breeze carried the faint scent of fresh flowers from a cozy little shop tucked between larger, more modern buildings. It was the sort of place you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. A small flower shop with a hand-painted sign that read, "Bloom and Bliss." Inside, the atmosphere was warm and inviting. The shop smelled of roses, lilies, and lavender, with the occasional hint of earthy potting soil. It wasn't fancy, but it had character. Wooden shelves lined with vases, a counter decorated with postcards and handwritten thank you notes, and a bell that jingled softly whenever the door opened. Behind the counter stood an older woman named Rosa, the shop's owner. Her hands were weathered from years of arranging flowers, and her face carried the kind of kindness that made you feel instantly at ease. Rosa loved her little shop, and she loved her customers even more. She always said flowers had a way of bringing out the best in people. That afternoon, Rosa was carefully arranging a bouquet of yellow roses when the door opened and the bell jingled. She looked up with her usual warm smile, ready to greet whoever walked in. But when she saw who it was, her smile faltered for just a moment, not because she was upset, but because she was surprised. Standing in the doorway, looking somewhat out of place in the modest flower shop, was none other than Keanu Reeves. Dressed simply in a black jacket and jeans, Keanu looked every bit as down-to-earth as the roles he was famous for. His hair was slightly disheveled, and he carried an air of quiet humility that seemed at odds with his celebrity status. He stepped inside and offered Rosa a small smile. "Hi," he said, his voice gentle yet unmistakable. "I was wondering if you could help me with something." Rosa blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She wasn't the type to get starstruck, but there was something about seeing someone so famous in her little shop that felt surreal. "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "What can I do for you?" Keanu hesitated, glancing around the shop as if searching for the right words. "I'm looking for a bouquet," he said finally, something simple but meaningful. Before Rosa could ask any more questions, the bell jingled again, and another customer walked in. This time, it was a little boy, no older than 8, with messy hair and a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He wore a worn-out hoodie that looked 2 sizes too big for him, and clutched a crumpled dollar bill in his hand. The boy looked around nervously, his eyes wide as they darted from one corner of the shop to the other. He didn't seem to notice Keanu standing near the counter. His focus was entirely on the flowers. Rosa's heart softened immediately. "Hello there," she said kindly, leaning over the counter to get the boy's attention. "Can I help you find something?" The boy hesitated, gripping the dollar bill tightly. He glanced at Rosa, then at the flowers, then back at Rosa again. I need a rose," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Rosa frowned slightly. "Just one rose." The boy nodded, his expression serious. "It's for my mom. She likes roses." Keanu, who had been quietly observing the exchange, took a step closer. He crouched down so he was at the boy's eye level, and gave him a gentle smile. "That's a nice thing to do for your mom," he said softly. "What's the occasion?" The boy shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the floor. "It's her birthday," he mumbled. Keanu and Rosa exchanged a quick glance, both of them moved by the boy's sincerity. Rosa reached for a single rose, carefully selecting the freshest one she could find. "Here you go," she said, handing it to the boy. The boy stared at the rose in awe, as if it were the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "How much is it?" he asked, holding up his dollar. Rosa hesitated. She couldn't bring herself to take the boy's money. "It's on the house," she said gently. "You keep your dollar." The boy's eyes lit up with gratitude, but before he could say anything, Keanu spoke up. "Wait," he said, his tone thoughtful. "What if we made it even better?" The boy looked at him confused. "Better?" Keanu smiled. What if we got your mom a whole bouquet? A bunch of roses, not just one. The boy's face fell slightly. I can't afford that, he said quietly. Keanu's smile didn't waver. Don't worry about that, he said. I've got it covered. Before the boy could protest, Keanu turned to Rosa. Can you make a beautiful bouquet of roses for his mom? Something really special. Rosa nodded, her hands already moving to gather the flowers. As she worked, Keanu turned back to the boy. What's your mom like? He asked. The boy hesitated again, as if he wasn't sure how to describe her. She's the best, he said finally. She works really hard, and she always makes sure I'm okay. Keanu nodded thoughtfully, his expression softening. She sounds like an amazing person, he said. When Rosa finished the bouquet, she handed it to the boy, who looked at it as if it were a treasure. His small hands trembled slightly as he held it. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Keanu reached out and ruffled the boy's hair gently. You're a good kid, he said. Your mom's lucky to have you. As the boy turned to leave, clutching the bouquet tightly, Keanu watched him go with a thoughtful expression. There was something about the boy, something unspoken but deeply moving. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but he felt a tug in his chest, a sense that this moment was more important than it seemed. Before the door closed behind the boy, Keanu called out, Hey kid. The boy turned around, his big curious eyes meeting Keanu's. Take care of your mom, okay? Keanu said. The boy nodded solemnly. I will, he promised. As the door closed and the boy disappeared down the street, Keanu stood there for a moment, lost in thought. Rosa watched him carefully, sensing that there was more on his mind than he was letting on. Finally, she broke the silence. You've got a good heart, she said softly. Keanu smiled faintly, but didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to the counter, his gaze lingering on the spot where the boy had stood. Something about that encounter had stirred something deep within him, a feeling he couldn't quite shake. And as he left the shop that day, he couldn't help but wonder about the boy and his mother, and what kind of story lay behind those innocent eyes. What Keanu didn't know was that this simple act of kindness was just the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Here's the continuation of your story. Keanu Reeves couldn't shake the image of the little boy from his mind. As he walked back to his car, the scene replayed over and over. The boy's shy demeanor, the dirt on his cheek, the way he clutched that $1 like it was all he had in the world. Something about the boy's sincerity had touched him deeply, but it was more than that. There was an unspoken sadness in his eyes, a quiet plea for something no bouquet of roses could fix. Keanu leaned against his car, staring at the bustling street without really seeing it. He'd met countless people in his life, from fans to strangers, each with their own story, but this felt different. He couldn't explain why, but he felt like there was more to the boy's story, something that needed to be understood. The thought lingered with him for the rest of the day. That evening, after wrapping up a quiet dinner at a nearby cafe, he decided to stop by the flower shop again. Maybe Rosa had noticed something he hadn't. When Keanu walked into the shop, the bell jingled once more, and Rosa looked up from where she was arranging a bouquet of daisies. Her face lit up in surprise. Back so soon? She asked with a small laugh. Keanu smiled faintly. Yeah, I guess I couldn't stay away. I wanted to ask about the boy who came in earlier. Do you know him? Rosa shook her head. I've seen him around a few times, though. He always seems to be on his own. Never talks much, just kind of drifts in and out. She paused, her expression softening. He's a sweet kid, but there's something about him, like he's carrying more than a boy his age should have to. Keanu nodded slowly, his thoughts racing. Did he say anything about where he lives? Rosa tilted her head thoughtfully. Not directly, but I seen him heading down the street toward the older neighborhood, near the park. It's not the best area, if I'm being honest. That was all Keanu needed to hear. The next day, he decided to take a walk near the park Rosa had mentioned. It was a quiet area, with crumbling sidewalks and faded buildings. The kind of place where life felt a little harder, a little more uncertain. Keanu blended in easily, his unassuming demeanor helping him go unnoticed. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for. Maybe the boy, maybe a clue about his life. But as he wandered the neighborhood, he found himself drawn to a small, run-down house on the corner of the street. The front yard was overgrown, and the paint on the wooden fence was peeling, but there was a charm to it, like someone had tried their best to keep it a home despite the wear and tear. As he stood there, the door opened, and a little boy stepped out. He was holding the bouquet of roses from the shop, now slightly wilted but still beautiful. Keanu watched as the boy carefully placed the bouquet on a small table on the porch, next to a picture frame. Even from a distance, Keanu could tell the frame held a photograph, but he couldn't see the details. The boy stood there for a moment, staring at the photo. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if the weight of the world were pressing down on him. Then he whispered something under his breath before turning and heading back inside. Keanu felt a pang in his chest. There was a story here, and it was one he needed to understand. The next day, Keanu returned to the neighborhood, this time with a plan. He brought a bag of groceries and knocked gently on the boy's door. It took a moment, but eventually the boy opened it, his wide eyes filled with surprise. "Hi," Keanu said, crouching down to meet his gaze. "I thought I'd stop by and say hello. Is your mom home?" The boy hesitated, glancing nervously over his shoulder before shaking his head. "She's not here right now," he said quietly. Keanu nodded, sensing the boy's discomfort. "That's okay. I just wanted to bring you something." He held up the bag of groceries. "I figured you and your mom might need a little extra." The boy stared at the bag, his eyes filling with a mix of gratitude and confusion. "Why?" he asked softly. "Because sometimes it's nice to have someone looking out for you," Keanu said gently. The boy hesitated for a long moment before stepping aside and letting Keanu in. The inside of the house was just as worn as the outside, but it was clean and tidy. There were signs of a child's presence, crayon drawings on the fridge, a small stack of books on the table. But there was also an emptiness that Keanu couldn't ignore. He set the groceries on the counter and glanced around, his eyes landing on the picture frame he'd seen the day before. This time, he could make out the details. It was a photo of the boy and a woman who had to be his mother. She had the same kind eyes and warm smile, but there was a sadness to her expression that mirrored her son's. Keanu turned back to the boy. "Your mom looks like a wonderful person," he said, nodding toward the photo. The boy's face fell, and he looked down at his hands. "She is," he said quietly, "but she's not here anymore." Keanu's heart sank. He crouched down again, his voice gentle. "What happened?" The boy hesitated, his eyes welling up with tears. "She got sick," he said finally, "and she's gone now." The weight of the boy's words hung heavy in the air. Keanu felt his chest tighten as he realized the truth. This little boy had been coming to the flower shop on his own, buying roses for a mother who was no longer there. For a moment, Keanu didn't know what to say. But then, he placed a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. "You've been so strong." The boy nodded, wiping at his eyes. "I just wanted to get her something nice," he whispered. "She always liked roses." Keanu felt a lump in his throat. This wasn't just a story of loss. It was a story of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. And as he sat there with the boy, he realized that his journey to understand had only just begun. What Keanu didn't know was that this small act of kindness would lead to something far greater than he could have imagined. Something that would bring hope not just to the boy, but to an entire community. Keanu sat with the boy for a while longer, listening to him talk about his mom. The more he spoke, the clearer it became that she had been the center of his world. She had worked long hours at a local diner to provide for him. Yet she never let him feel like they didn't have enough. She had a way of turning the simplest moments into memories, singing songs while cooking dinner, reading bedtime stories by candlelight during power outages, and always finding a reason to laugh, even on the hardest days. The boy's voice trembled as he shared how much he missed her, and Keanu felt his heart ache. It was a kind of loss that no child should have to endure, and yet this boy carried it with a quiet strength that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. As they talked, Keanu noticed something unusual. The house was far too quiet for a place where a child lived alone. No television hum, no distant chatter from neighbors, just silence. It made him wonder how long the boy had been managing on his own. He decided to gently probe further. "Who's looking after you now?" Keanu asked, keeping his tone light and non-threatening. The boy hesitated, his fingers twisting the hem of his hoodie. "I stay here by myself most of the time," he admitted. "Sometimes a neighbor checks in, but I don't like bothering anyone." Keanu felt a surge of concern. "What about school? Friends? Do you have someone you can call if you need help?" The boy shrugged, his small shoulders sagging. "I go to school, but I don't really talk to anyone. And it's okay. I've been fine." Keanu knew the boy was trying to be brave, but the reality of his situation was clear. He was struggling, and no child should have to face life's hardships alone. In that moment, Keanu made a decision. He couldn't just walk away from this. The next day, Keanu returned to the neighborhood, but this time he wasn't alone. He had made a few phone calls to local community organizations and had brought along a social worker named Maria who specialized in helping children in difficult situations. Maria was warm and kind, and her presence immediately put the boy at ease. Together, they talked about what could be done to help. Maria explained that there were programs and resources available, things that could provide the boy with a stable home, proper care, and opportunities for a brighter future. But what surprised Keanu the most was the boy's reaction. At first, he was hesitant, unsure about leaving the home where he had so many memories of his mother. But as Maria gently explained that he wouldn't have to say goodbye to those memories, and that they were only trying to make things better for him, the boy slowly began to open up. He started to see that accepting help didn't mean forgetting his mom. It meant honoring her by continuing to grow and thrive, just as she would have wanted. Keanu stayed by the boy's side every step of the way. He didn't just disappear after making introductions. He became an active part of the process, offering support and encouragement whenever it was needed. He even helped organize a small memorial event for the boy's mother, inviting a few neighbors and community members who had known her. They shared stories, lit candles, and celebrated the love she had poured into her son's life. The climax came during that memorial, as the boy stood in front of the small crowd, clutching the picture frame of his mother. His voice was steady as he spoke about her, about how much she had taught him, and how deeply he missed her. The room was filled with quiet tears, but there was also a sense of hope, a feeling that her legacy of kindness and resilience would live on through her son. After the memorial, Maria helped arrange for the boy to move in with a foster family who lived just a few streets away. They were kind and understanding, and they made sure he felt at home. They even let him visit his old house whenever he wanted, so he could feel connected to his past while building a new future. Keanu kept in touch with the boy, visiting him regularly and making sure he was adjusting well. Their bond grew stronger over time, and the boy began to smile more, laugh more, and dream about the future in ways he hadn't before. As the months passed, Keanu saw how much the boy had grown. He had made friends at school, discovered a love for drawing, and even started a small garden in his foster family's backyard, where he grew roses in memory of his mom. One day, as they sat together in that garden, the boy looked up at Keanu and said, "Thank you for everything." Keanu smiled, his eyes reflecting the warmth of the moment. "You're the one who's been strong," he said. "I just helped a little." Your mom would be so proud of you. The boy nodded, his gaze drifting to the roses swaying gently in the breeze. I hope so, he said softly. As Keanu left that day, he couldn't help but feel that the experience had changed him too. It was a reminder of the power of kindness, of how even the smallest gestures could ripple outward and create something extraordinary. And for the boy, it was a new beginning. A chance to take the lessons his mother had taught him and carry them forward into a brighter, more hopeful future. The story wasn't about one act of kindness or one person's journey. It was about the way compassion can connect us all, even in the most unexpected moments. And as Keanu walked away, he knew that sometimes the simplest things, like a bouquet of roses, could lead to the most profound changes.